10 years. It's already higher than that now. I mean, I don't care what the government numbers say. He is assuming that unemployment over the next 10 years averages, get this, averages, I think, 5.9%. Now, it's already over 9. How's he going to average 5.9? How low does he think it's going to go? He also assumes that interest rates are going to stay very low during that entire 10-year period of time. So we're going to have all this fast economic growth, but rates are going to stay historically low. We're going to have no inflation. We're going to create all these jobs. The whole thing is a fantasy. None of it's going to happen. But even if it could happen, the cuts are still insignificant. In fact, the cuts, even the cuts that the Republicans, the Republicans in the House tried to pass $60 billion in cuts, or pass $60 billion in cuts for 2011. They tried to get to $80 billion, and they couldn't do it. There are other Republicans in the House. $80 billion is too draconian. We can't cut $80 billion. $80 billion is nothing. I mean, even the $60 billion that they cut, if they cut 10 times that from this year's budget, if they cut $600 billion, that would still leave $1 trillion in debt this year. That's how bad the situation is. Yet they're talking about these tiny amount of money. And what they don't understand is the real problem that we face. Because if we keep doing this, if we keep letting the world know, no, we're not going to solve the problem. We're going to keep on printing money, and if you don't like it, right, tough. Right? We don't care that the dollar's a reserve currency. We're going to keep interest rates at 0. We're going to flood the world with money, and you're going to have to eat that inflation. We're exporting that inflation to the rest of the world. They're going to say, no, we don't want it. They're not going to buy it. They're not going to take that inflation. That's what they don't understand. This is not a problem for our grandchildren. They keep talking about, oh, if we don't solve the deficit, we're putting these debts on our grandchildren. The grandchildren aren't going to pay these debts. We're going to deal with it right now. This year, next year, this whole thing is going to collapse around us. And here's the way it's going to happen. It's going to happen similarly to what you're seeing in Ireland, in Greece, in Iceland. What happened there? Governments borrowed too much money, and then the creditors didn't want to lend them any more money because they realized that they weren't going to get paid back. Now, right now, people aren't worried about getting paid back by the U.S. because the U.S. could print money. But pretty soon they're going to realize that, hey, that does, there's nothing great about getting paid back in money that doesn't buy anything. That's just the same thing as not getting paid back at all. And we've been able to, we've had a little extra slack because of the fact that the dollar was the reserve currency. But as I said, it's coming to an end because you can't have a reserve currency in perpetual decline. The dollar hit a record low last week against the Swiss franc. The dollar hit a 52-week low against the Canadian dollar, a 52-week low against the Australian dollar. In fact, it might be an all-time low against the Australian dollar, I'm not sure. But the dollar is falling, and you can't have the reserve currency that is continuously declining. You can't have a reserve currency with a 0% interest rate. So as the world moves away from the dollar, they will start to question the ability of the U.S. to pay back its debts in money of real purchasing power. And so our creditors aren't going to want to buy the bonds. And then what's going to happen? That's when interest rates are going to rise sharply because we don't have buyers. Now what's going to happen? Is the federal government going to default? Because when rates go up, as I said earlier, we have very short-term financing. If interest rates go up, not only does the economy go back into recession, but the government can't pay interest on the debt. So is Ben Bernanke going to come in and just buy? The Federal Reserve is already the largest holder of U.S. Treasuries now because of all the Treasuries that have been bought. Is the Fed going to step up and buy more? If they do that, then they destroy the dollar. Then we have runaway inflation. And that's a much worse economic event than default. Default is, maybe that's bad if the U.S. government has a default, but if we have to inflate, the consequences there are far more dire. And if you remember back to the real estate crisis and how quickly these things unfolded. Because it was, 2007, 2008, all the leading economists, the government, everybody said it was great. The global economy had never been in better shape. Everything was perfect. The U.S. economy was growing. It was blue skies as far as the eye can see. We were on the precipice of the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. And many politicians were telling us if we didn't do the TARP, if we didn't do the bailouts, it would have been worse than the Great Depression. So we were that close to that catastrophe. And nobody could see it coming. So my point is, we're that close to an even bigger catastrophe. And the same people that couldn't see the last one can't see this one because they still don't understand the problem. And even if you remember when the housing crisis first started and the subprime market had a problem, all the experts said, oh, well, you know, it's just subprime, don't worry about it. It's contained, right? It's not going to affect the overall market. The rest of the real estate market, the prime market is solid. Well, I knew that was nonsense when they were saying it. And even back then, what people were afraid of, they said, was contagion. They said, well, what if it spreads? What if this stuff's... It wasn't about contagion. The whole market was already sick. It's just that subprime is where the symptoms first appeared. But the prime market was just as sick. It just took a little longer for the symptoms to surface. And that was my point back then. We just had to wait. Well, that's the same thing with sovereign debt. We are seeing right now several nations that have been living beyond their means, that have borrowed too much money. They are having their day of reckoning. But the idea is that, well, that's not going to happen here. That it's just this small group of European pig nations, the subprime nations, they're having a problem, but not America. Right? Even though we have more debt than they do, that, well, somehow we're different, and it's not going to happen. Well, it's going to happen. And when it happens, it's going to be even worse, because Greece or Ireland, you know, they got the European Union bailing them out. I think it's a mistake, but you know, there is help. There's no one that's going to bail out the United States. After all, they've been bailing us out. The Chinese, the Japanese, the Saudis, they already have us on life support. My point is that they can't afford it anymore. That the burden that we are asking the world to bear is so enormous that they can't possibly take it anymore. And you know, the crazy thing is people think that this is going to be a terrible thing. If China, if they allow the dollar to collapse, that this is going to be a disaster for China. This is the best thing that can happen to China. It's going to be a disaster for America, but it's going to be great for the Chinese, because you know, the Chinese will be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. I mean, think about the loss to China. Think about all the products that they're producing that they could consume if they didn't give them to us. Because what are they getting in return for all their products? They're getting a piece of paper. A little piece of paper that they can't do anything with but hold on to and buy treasuries and get more pieces of paper. Meanwhile, we're getting all this stuff that they made for all their hard work, all their factories, all their machines, all their labor. We get all that stuff. So if we don't buy it, it doesn't mean that all those factories are going to shut down and that all the Chinese are going to be unemployed. No. It means that all those Chinese workers will get to enjoy the products that are being produced in Chinese factories. Because when the Chinese currency rises, that means the prices for everything come down for the Chinese. Oil gets cheaper, food gets cheaper, everything gets cheaper. So they're richer. They have a higher standard of living as a result of a strengthening currency. The opposite happens here. Everything gets more expensive for us, so we don't consume as much. All of a sudden, you go down Walmart and the shelves will be empty. And if there's anything, you know, people will be at Walmart, they'll think they're at Neiman Marcus or Saks Fifth Avenue. Because things are going to be expensive, whatever happens to be there. Because all those products that used to be on the shelves of Walmart will be on the shelves of some Chinese stores. That's what's going to happen over there, where they realize that. And instead of squandering their savings on U.S. Treasuries, if they want to invest their savings, they'll invest their savings locally to grow their own economy instead of subsidizing our consumption. Now, yeah, they're vendor financing us. You know, they're loaning us money to buy their products, but if we can't pay it back, they might as well dump those products in the Pacific Ocean. So they will figure this out. Now, for a while, I think the Chinese authorities were content to allow this to go on because they thought it was bringing some kind of stability to their economy. But they can see now that it's bringing instability. They've pegged their currency to the dollar, and instead of giving them a sound currency, it's giving them inflation. And if they don't want it, they have to stop. I mean, they are trying to stop inflation now with higher rates, but that's not going to work if they keep printing RMB. They've tried price controls in certain products, but that's not going to work. None of that's going to work. The only thing that will work is to stop printing RMB. But they can't stop the presses until they let the dollar go down. And when the Chinese let the dollar go down, everybody is going to let the dollar go down. Because right now, all these countries are trying to remain competitive with China. And if China stops buying dollars, everybody in Southeast Asia is going to stop buying dollars.